Hello and welcome to the Detroit Institute of Arts Thursdays at the Museum program. I'm Amanda Harrison, a Community Engagement Manager with the DIA. Thank you for joining us for today's program, Let Me Tell You a Story, Part 2. During the program, I'd like to encourage you to please ask questions. You can do so by selecting the Q&A icon on the right-hand side of your screen. Questions will be read on screen by Christine Mark, the DIA's Manager of Volunteer Development. This event is being recorded, so if you'd like to watch it again later, there will be links available on our YouTube page. Today, we're joined by trained docents, Howard Rosenberg, Deb Coomes, and Kathleen McBroom. Please give our hosts a warm welcome.
Hello, Amanda. It's good to see you. It's nice to see your smiling face, and I'm excited to be here today, hosting and helping the ladies through with their program. So this is part 2 of Let Me Tell You a Story. And Let Me Tell You a Story is all about art and stories, because over the years, making meaning in the world is in this world is common among all cultures. Throughout time, art has been used to teach us essential values and beliefs and understandings about the world around us, about morality, about stories, about government, and about just ourselves. So this presentation is going to show you how artists use their art to tell stories. And we're going to use pieces from the permanent collection in the DIA to talk about that. So, and our colleagues, Deb Coomes and Kathleen McBroom, are going to be leading the way. So let's get started. Hello, Deb. Deb might be muted, or she might have fallen asleep during my introduction. We're not sure which. However, she's here. I know that because I just saw her.
I'm sorry. Hi, Howard. How are you today? It's a beautiful day.
I am good. I'm sorry I put you to sleep so quickly, Deb. Usually it takes about a half an hour for people to fall asleep with me talking.
Not at all. Hi, all of our friends from the DIA. And I've been a docent here for about 10 years, and I want to introduce my colleague, our friend, Kathleen McBroom. Hey, Kathleen.
Hey, Deb. How are you? How are you, Howard? Good to see everybody.
You too, Kathleen.
I've been a docent down at the DIA for about 3 years, and I am super excited to begin today's program about Let Me Tell You a Story with this wonderful picture that we have here. I mean, let's take a look at this thing. There's all sorts of stuff. Let's begin down in the bottom left-hand corner. And there we see a discarded broom. It's just laying there. Yep, they've given up on trying to restore calm. What we've got going on here is a good old-fashioned bar brawl. Let's continue looking at everything that's going on here. Let's move across the bottom of the picture, moving to the right, okay? There, right next to the broom, we have a game that's been tipped upside down with small pieces. Back then it was called knick-knack. Today we know it as backgammon, and it was a gambling game. If you come over, there are some cards scattered on the floor. Looks like there's a broken pot. We have another one that's tipped over on its side. There's a broken pipe, and we've got another jug. So already we've got gambling, we've got cards, we've got drinking going on. If we continue kind of moving around the circle counterclockwise, we have 3 gentlemen over there on the right side who are just kind of looking on, enjoying the view. And you'll notice the one gentleman in front is smoking. He's got a pipe as well. Now, tobacco would have been brought over from the New World to the Netherlands at this point. And some people still touted its supposedly medicinal values. But I mean, at this point in time, the Dutch already knew that it was very addictive and it was a very dirty and smelly habit. So let's add that to our list of vices. If we continue up around, going around in a counterclockwise circle, you might be able to see on the back there, there's a beam and it's got some like white scratch marks on it, kind of like crosses. That's how the innkeeper kept track of how many jugs of wine and how many jugs of beer the patrons had ordered that night. It was kind of like running a tab. And if you'll notice, there's a lot of marks up there. The spirits have been running rather freely during this episode. go directly to the middle up on top. There's a chandelier. It's decorated quite appropriately with grape leaves from the vines, and it's hard to see, but on the outer rim of the chandelier that's facing out at us, there's an engraving in there. And the engraving is in Latin, and it's a quotation from Proverbs, and Proverbs comes from the Hebrew Old Testament, or the Christian Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. And what this particular one says is, wine is a mocker, hard spirits is a brawler. I think that's most appropriate for what's going on here. Directly next to the chandelier, over there to the left, we have a gentleman who's sawing away on his fiddle, providing a soundtrack for the scene. Continuing around, we see an open door or an open window. So either this merriment started in the evening and it's now early morning, it's gone on all night, or else this is taking place in broad daylight, which is even worse. All these people should be out attending to their business, but instead they're in here. Directly below that, we have two gentlemen who are pummeling each other. And now finally we come to the center part of the painting. And we have one gentleman over on the left. He's sprawled out, his socks are falling down. He's got his right arm cocked back. He's holding a jug and he looks like he's getting ready to clock somebody with it. His target seems to be the gentleman over on the right side who has kind of stumbled to his feet and is pulling out his sword, or he's trying to at any rate. And there in the middle, you have those two poor women who are doing their best to break things up and restore order. And you'll notice that that's where the light is concentrated. That's the only bright spot in this painting. And these two women would have probably been the innkeeper's wife and daughter, because no respectable women would have found themselves in a common room like this at all. So what exactly is going on here? Well, the name of this painting is The Gambler's Quarrel, and it was painted in 1635 by a Dutch artist whose name was Jan Steen. And Steen's father had been a brewer, and this scene was painted near Haarlem. And Haarlem was known for its crystal clear water that was especially perfect for brewing beer. And there are over 50 breweries in Haarlem at this time. And the artist, Steen himself, actually owned a tavern for a while. So Steen was probably painting from real life. And this sort of painting, it's called a genre painting. You'll find this up on the 3rd floor of the DIA in our Dutch galleries, and a room full of genre paintings. And genre paintings are just pictures of scenes of everyday life. And a scene like this probably would have appeared in a publication that was popular back then. They were called the Dutch emblem books. And the emblem books were kind of like guides on how responsible citizens should lead their lives. And they would put paintings like this in kind of to show what not to do. And people enjoyed looking at them, kind of like the way people like to look at those articles called Celebrities Behaving Badly Today, or something like that. But anyway, these were very popular, and Steen became known for these. And just one last comment is that if someone told you that you had a Steen house, that was an insult. That meant that you had a messy, unruly, just free-for-all like we have here. I think I'll stop here. Christine, do we have any questions?
Not at this time.
Okay, well, thank you. And I think maybe we should move on from this kind of chaos and riotous, you know, yeah, something nice and calm and peaceful. Deb, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Kathleen. So that was a scene from everyday life. Very interesting. Okay, let's move on to this beautiful object. It's a wonderful tiled niche from our collection of Islamic art that's located on the 1st floor of the DIA. It was made in Iran at the workshop of the artist Ustad Muhammad Hussein. The impact of Persian tiles occupies a prominent place in Islamic art, and Iran has the most beautiful tile work in the world. Beginning in the 13th century, these colorful tiles were used to adorn palaces, monuments, and mosques. Decorating with this form of art reached its zenith in the 19th century. Tiled niches were an important architectural design in Iran. Often, they're areas where sacred texts are stored or where water, a symbol of paradise, is kept. These tiles are composed of painted glazed fritware, and that's a type of pottery that is made of clay and ground glass. The predominant color in this niche is called Persian blue. Persian blue is a representation of the color of lapis lazuli, which comes from Iran and Afghanistan. Take a look at all these tiny figures and designs that appear on this niche. They are modeled in relief. What that means is that they stand out just a little bit from the surface of the tiles. This niche is a marvelous example of Persian pottery at its finest. This beautiful work of art depicts an episode from the amazing tale of Yusuf and Zuleika that was written by the Persian Sufi poet Yami in 1483. It is one of the greatest mystical stories of the Islamic world, and this story has been told and retold countless times and in many languages. Now, here is their story. It was said that Yusuf was more beautiful than any other human being and of such excellent character that he was chosen by Allah and bestowed with prophethood. He was the youngest son of Jacob, who had 11 other sons, but Jacob loved Yusuf more than any of his sons, and so this caused great jealousy among the brothers. As time went on, that malice in their hearts grew bigger and larger, so they devised a plan to take Yusuf to a well, throw him in the well, and leave him there to die. But when Yusuf was thrown in the well, he grabbed the ledge inside the well, and he prayed to Allah to give him strength and salvation. Soon after this, a caravan came by, and they wanted to draw water from the well. So they found the boy in the well. But instead of letting him go, they took him, they captured him, they sent him to a bazaar. They went to the bazaar in Egypt, and they auctioned him to the highest bidder. Now, Yami says this in his poem. What happened in the heat of exchange at the bazaar, where everyone from anywhere was buying Egyptians, someone very handsome came toward the bazaar. It is enough that we should all be his purchaser. So many people at that bazaar saw him coming. They saw Yusuf and they said, he is so handsome, we want to buy him. But in the end, he was purchased by a pharaoh whose wife's name was Zuleika. Yusuf lived as a servant in their home for many years, but Zuleika, who fell in love with Yusuf, forgot what was right and what was wrong. But Yusuf, in his devotion to God, rebuked Zuleika. Even so, when the pharaoh learned of their relationship, he ordered Yusuf to be taken to prison. During Yusuf's time in jail, he was bestowed with the ability to interpret dreams. One day, the pharaoh who was dying had a very troubling dream, and he sent for Yusuf to help him. When he saw him, he knew that he was an innocent man, and he bestowed upon him all of his riches. 30 years went by, and Zuleika was old and blind. But one day, when he was walking through the city, Yusuf saw Zuleika. He grabbed her, held her, kissed her forehead, and prayed with her. And then a miracle happened. Zuleika regained her youth and her beauty. Then Yusuf and Zuleika were married and lived in happiness forever. Now let's take a closer look at our niche. Can we have the next slide, please? These are the upper panels, and these panels are talking about that particular story when Yusuf was being bought at the bazaar. Now, on the right panel, you'll see the pharaoh sitting up on top. He's sitting, he's on his throne, and he's surrounded by his courtiers. Below him, just below him, there is a man, and he is holding a scale. When you take a look at the very bottom of this panel, you can see two people putting things on the scale. Those are Zuleika's jewels, because she's going to use those jewels to buy Yusuf. Now let's look at the left panel. You see Yusuf enthroned as well. He has got that flame-like halo over his head, and he's among young nobles. Now right below him is a guy holding a tray, and on the tray, maybe those are offerings that people are serving up so that they can buy Yusuf. Next to that man with the tray is a very old woman. Now, if you can see it closely, she's holding a skein of threads, and she's trying to buy him, the beautiful boy, with her threads. Now, right under both of these two panels is a saying, and the saying says, enough though little be in my hand, among the purchasers, let me stand. So that is referring to that old woman who she's making a very humble offer for him, but she's outbid by Zuleika's jewels. Now let's go to the next slide, please. The scenes below are the main panel depict male and female courtiers being entertained by musicians and dancers. And all around the border is a series of different people men who are on horseback trying to capture and kill wild animals. Now take a look right over the opening of this niche. You see two winged angels, and they have trumpets. They're flanking the opening of this niche. Now, can we go right back to the very beginning of this presentation here, Howard, with the full niche?
I'll find it. There you go.
Thank you. Okay, now, here's something very interesting I want to tell you about this. It's a very interesting story that has nothing to do with the story of Yusuf and Zuleika. Apart from the rarity of this niche, it has a very interesting association to Detroit. Hazen Pingree, mayor of Detroit from 1889 to 1897, and then governor of Michigan from 1897 to 1901, acquired this niche from the Shah of Iran when he met the Shah at the Baths of Carlsbad, Germany in 1888. In order to defray the cost of his travels, the Shah would sell many precious objects from Iran, and he would sell them from the mosques or elsewhere, knowing that these products would be treasured in Europe. So it was in this opportune way that the Governor Pingree came into possession of this niche, which he had set up in his home as a fireplace. In 1954, the DIA received this as a gift from his daughter, and her name is Mrs. Wilson W. Mills, and now we can all enjoy it together. Christine, are there any questions?
Actually, Deb, there is a question. The viewer would like to know if you could repeat the name of the poet and the name of the story this is based on.
The name of the story is Yusuf and Zuleika, and the name of the poet, it's a very, very long name, but I will call him Jami, Jami, and he wrote this story in 1483.
And he was a famous Persian poet.
A very famous Persian poet, a Sufi poet. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Any others?
No.
Okay, good. Well, now let's go back to Kathleen, who's going to show us a wonderful work of art that's going to be telling us the story of redemption.
Thanks, Deb. So this is a painting of Martha and Mary Magdalene, and it was created by Michelangelo Merisi de Caravaggio. And in this, it's a story. It's telling us a story from the Christian New Testament. And over there on the left, we have Martha, and she was one of the earliest followers of Jesus. And then in the center, we have her sister, Mary Magdalene, who was a very well-known courtesan. And we can tell that Mary Magdalene is a courtesan because when we look at her, Look at how low cut her dress is. She's got that low décolletage. Her clothes are very rich. They've got gold trim on them. Her hair is done in an elaborate hairdo. She's got that one curl coming down the center of her forehead. And she looked down in front of her. There's that little white alabaster bowl that has a cosmetic sponge coming out of it, and there's a comb. These are all symbols of vanity and being concerned with outward appearances. One of the most telling signs, however, is that big mirror that's over there on the right side of the painting. Mary Magdalene kind of has her arm draped over it, and it's this big convex mirror. However, look at it. It's completely dark except for that one spot. Mary Magdalene is not reflected in that mirror at all. That's a sign that Mary Magdalene has no inner life. She has really an empty, dark life. And what's going on in this painting as we look at it? Look over at Martha on the left and look at the position of her hands. She's ticking things off on her fingers. Now, some people have said that she's ticking off Mary Magdalene's sins, but others interpret it that she's ticking off the miracles of Jesus and why Mary Magdalene should become one of his followers. Now look at Mary Magdalene's face. And look, it's pointed. Her face is pointed at her sister Martha, but look at her eyes. Her eyes are unfocused. Mary Magdalene is looking inward. And Caravaggio has captured the exact second where Mary Magdalene is literally seeing the light. And this is typical of a Baroque painting, very dramatic. It's like someone has drawn back the curtain in the middle of a very private, intimate scene, or someone has drawn back the curtain at a very important part in a play. We see here Mary Magdalene getting it. She's seeing the light, literally. And this is emphasized because, again, look at the mirror. There's that one little bright square, as if a window is opening. And look at Mary Magdalene's right hand. She's holding very delicately a little flower, and that's an orange blossom. And an orange blossom traditionally is a flower that was carried by brides. And in the Christian church, when a woman becomes a follower of Jesus, she is sometimes referred to as becoming a bride of Jesus. And so these are all these symbols that let us know that Caravaggio has very, very skillfully captured this very intense private moment. And the way Caravaggio has done this, he's employed an awful lot of different techniques. The major one probably is the chiaroscuro. And chiaroscuro is a term that talks about it, that means using darkness and lightness in contrast with each other to make things very dramatic, like shadow and lighting. And look at how bright Mary Magdalene's face and her upper body are compared to the shadows in the dark. It really makes her pop out. In addition to the chiaroscuro, the rest of the colors that he uses are pretty subdued, controlled, limited palette. Look at Martha. She's wearing the exact same colors that Mary Magdalene is wearing. Only while Martha's clothes are really simple homespun, look at Mary Magdalene. I mean, it looks like she's got silk or satin there on her right arm, and that green cascade over by the mirror looks like it's pure velvet. One other technique that Caravaggio used is look at the table. Look at the perspective of the table. The table extends right out the bottom of the picture. It makes it look as if we are sitting right on the other side of the table, that we are present. We're being pulled into the painting itself. And Caravaggio was considered just the master of all of these special techniques. Everything, the chiaroscuro and the techniques, and just bringing the adventure and the excitement into the paintings of Baroque painting. And Caravaggio painted this in Rome in about 1635, and it just captures this story from the Christian New Testament so well. Christine, are there any questions?
Not at this time, Kathleen. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well then, let's move on, shall we, Deb? It's up to you. Take it away.
Thanks, Kathleen. Now, this is the Court of Death. It is painted by the artist Rembrandt Peale, and this is the largest painting at the DIA. It is an awesome oil on canvas, and it measures 11.5 feet tall by 23.5 feet wide. Can I have our next slide, please, Howard? Rembrandt Peale was a member of the second generation of the Peale first family of artists. He began his career at a very early age when his father, Charles Wilson Peale, taught him how to paint. Rembrandt began painting when he was 8 years old, and at the age of 13, began to paint portraits. He was just 17 years old when he painted over his first of over 70 portraits of President George Washington. Here is a portrait, a self-portrait of Peale from our collection at the DIA. He made this painting of himself when he was 50 years old. The next slide, Howard, please. In 1820, now this is 2020, so exactly 200 years ago, Rembrandt created this painting, The Court of Death. It's based on a poem that was very well known at the time. That poem, called Death, was written by the Unitarian bishop. His name was Beelby Porteous of London. It showcased the moral belief that human difficulties were caused by people themselves, and they're not the result of a vengeful God. People wanted to create this painting in order to show the reality of death and the charms of virtue versus the evils of vice. In other words, it was meant to be read by the viewer as a story that says, live your life in a good and virtuous way, and you will face death without fear. Large and complicated paintings like this were popular in the 19th century. The subject of death and how to deal with it was very common. It was a common theme in America because not too long before that, they understood that death could come to anyone at any moment. Just 50 years earlier, the Revolutionary War left 25,000 people dead from scurvy, from smallpox, and from the war. And in 1820, while Peale was making this painting, yellow fever was ravaging his city of Baltimore. So Peale wanted everyone to see this painting. And so he had this canvas rolled up and he had it transported up and down the East Coast. And it went from city to city in the United States, on the east side of the United States. It made stops in Philadelphia, Boston, New York, Albany, Charleston, Savannah, and many more. Showings were arranged at churches, at town halls, and in tents. People would pay 25 cents to view this painting by gaslight. Imagine going into a tent in the dark, and by gaslight, you see this painting and you hear in the background somebody reading the poem that's called Death. Quite scary indeed. And you'd be given a pamphlet so that you could take a look at the painting and know what was going on in the painting. Now, Kathleen, what stands out to you in this painting?
Well, Deb, this is a huge painting and there's an awful lot of people in there. But I have to tell you that one poor gentleman in the center who's kind of laying there, he doesn't look like he's doing too well.
Kathleen, you're right. He's not doing well. As a matter of fact, he's dead. He's laying in front of the central figure of death, who's sitting in the shadows, and he's presiding over the scene. Below the feet of death is this guy, cut down in the prime of his life, and you know what? That demonstrates the power that death has over all of us. Now, take a look at the right side of the painting. You see figures of war and his agents who are trampling over their victims. Take a look at that poor woman and that orphan who are laying on the ground. And notice the woman on the left side of the painting. She's right near the feet of death. She's dipping her cup into the warm, intoxicating liquid. But behind her are all those figures. They're representing intemperance, frenzy, suicide, and all who have died from a decadent life. And can we see the next slide, Howard, please? Approaching death is the figure of old age. Take a look at that guy. He's got his arms outstretched, and he is being helped closer to death by this beautiful woman called Virtue. Now, this man, the model for this guy is Charles Willson Peale, Rembrandt's father. Now, the figure of old age, he's supported by Virtue because he's had a long, productive, virtuous life. Old age is able to welcome death with outstretched open arms. Over time, more than 32,000 people came to see this Court of Death, and the show became very profitable for the artist. The Court of Death was the most ambitious painting of over 600 paintings that Rembrandt Peale made throughout his career, and today he's considered one of the greatest artists of his time in America. Now, the Court of Death is located on the second floor in the American Galleries. The next time you come to the DIA, Howard, will you please advance the slide? You are welcome to take your picture in front of this wonderful work of art. We docents do. Hey, Howard, what do you have to say about that?
Well, you know, Deb, I believe that's our class when we were training to be docents. And I'm looking at myself right here. Do you see anybody else you know?
Well, I see your partner in crime, Mr. Ray Henney, who's kind of in the middle of this piece.
Yeah, I just want to know how he wound up being, you know, the virtuous guy, you know?
That is a good question.
I mean, I get why Keisha's representing virtue, but Ray, you know, he's an attorney, isn't he?
Oh, that's a low blow, Howard. Now, Howard, are you there? Okay, now look in the middle. Who's that? That's our colleague, our partner on this team, Jim. But look over to Jim's left. Who is that? Our beautiful Kathleen McBroom. So, there you go, you class. You did a very good job. Kathleen, do you have anything that you want to make a few comments about this piece?
I just wanted to add really quickly that when the museum is open, we do a lot of orientations for college groups in the fall, and they bring people over from Wayne State and Ann Arbor and the College for Creative Studies. And the groups of students often don't know each other very well. And I have found that if I bring them into this painting and I tell them the story about it, Deb, just like you did, and then I say, okay, let's take a picture and have you pose, it's a great icebreaker. They argue about who gets to be who. I get to take about maybe 15 pictures with their cell phones. And so this has become kind of one of my major stops on every tour. Everybody loves the story, and everyone, I love this picture because it really shows just how huge this piece of art is. So thanks, Deb.
Thanks, Kathleen. And you know, that has a moral story that applies to us today in a way. Okay, now I want to go back to you. You're going to tell us a story of love, of life, and of death.
Indeed. Thanks, Deb. We're looking at a dagger and a scabbard. It's called the Othello and Desdemona dagger and scabbard. And it was created by a woman artist. Her name was Félicie de Favreau, and she was born and raised in Naples. But when she was a relatively young woman, she moved to France. And she studied painting and sculpture. And she was very well known for seizing on themes from mythology and the classics and literature and very romantic type stories. And she would make her creations primarily out of bronze, and sometimes she would include marble or stones or even mirrors. This piece right here, it's a dagger and a scabbard, and obviously it's decorative. I don't think this is the sort of thing anybody would want to take into battle with them. But it looks very, very imposing, but it's a dagger, so it's only about 22 inches long. And you can see at the top there where the handle comes down. And it's called the Othello and Desdemona dagger and scabbard. Now, Othello and Desdemona are two characters from a play that was written by William Shakespeare in 1603. And the name of the play is Othello, the Tragedy of a Moor from Venice. Okay, so Othello is the main character, and Othello is Moorish, which means that he is black. and he is a general in the Venetian army. He's of African heritage. And Othello is married to the beautiful Desdemona. She's a Venetian woman. And Othello has an underling in the army. His name is Iago. And Iago gets passed over for promotion. Othello promotes a younger officer, and Iago is filled with anger and envy. And so, to get revenge on Othello, Iago makes up a story and plants suspicion that Desdemona is seeing other men and having affairs. Well, when Othello finds out about this, he believes it and he kills poor Desdemona. And Howard, can we see the next slide, please? There over on the left, you can see a close-up. This is the very top of the dagger. It's the handle, and you can see this is the moment where Othello is getting ready to kill poor Desdemona. The tragedy of this is that Desdemona was completely innocent. She was a true and faithful wife. And we can see this. This is a detail from further down the scabbard. And there we have Desdemona, and it looks like she's sleeping peacefully. And this part of the sword, of course, is made out of silver, and she's like wearing a robe that appears to be white. And Desdemona was innocent, and when Othello realized this, he killed himself out of grief. And if you look at this too, you can kind of see there are the two faces right below Desdemona, kind of like the two faces of people lying. And so this was a story that had really captured a lot of people's imagination. And just really quick, Howard, can we go to the next slide? This is another piece of art. This is a huge sculpture that was created by an African-American artist whose name was Fred Wilson. And he called this To Die Upon a Kiss. So why am I showing this? Well, the very last line of Othello, the play by Shakespeare, as Othello is killing himself, he says, and now I die, to die upon a kiss. And that line was written by William Shakespeare in 1603. That line influenced the dagger that Félicité de Favreau created in 1835. And then Fred Wilson, who himself was an African American working in Venice, who felt a little bit out of place, created this incredible piece of sculpture. It's a chandelier in 2011. That's over 500 years from when the play was written to when this piece of art was created. And it just kind of gives really strong testimony to the power of a great story, Othello, the Moor of Venice. Christine, do we have any questions?
No, but thank you, Kathleen, for including the chandelier and the explanation. That was really interesting.
Thank you. Well, Deb, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and you're going to tell us a story about another poor young woman who was done wrong by a scoundrel.
Thanks, Kathleen, and you're right, another poor young woman. This painting is called Marguerite Leaving the Church, and it's by Eric Scheffer, and he created this in 1838. This oil-on canvas is located on the 3rd floor of the DIA in the French gallery called the Era of Revolution. In the years between 1780 and 1850, Europeans experienced a series of chaotic changes, very dramatic changes in their lives. This was the time in France of the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, and the restoration of the monarchy. War after war after war happened, and ruling classes were vanquished, traditional values were swept away. These turbulent times left many Europeans feeling tossed between stability and uncertainty. The response by artists in their music, literature, painting, and sculptures led to these troubled times, created a movement called Romanticism. In this movement, artists explored the significance of their inner lives. They probed what was seen as the rational depths of the human mind, especially the emotions of fear and passion. Mary Shelley created Frankenstein during this time. and Beethoven wrote many of his stormy symphonies. Painters also gave visual form to emotional torment and angst. Now, Ary Scheffer was a romantic artist. He was from France. He was known for his paintings based on the popular works of literature that were written during this time, a time when women were seen as weak and frail and vulnerable and powerless. This image is based on a scene from Faust, a great work of German literature that was written by the poet and novelist Johann Wolfgang van Goethe. The story focuses on a young scholar named Faust. He is highly successful, but he's very dissatisfied with his life. His desire for power and for earthly pleasures attracts the attention of the devil Mephistopheles, who promises to satisfy him and all of his needs in exchange for his soul. Mephistopheles leads Faust through a series of experiences that culminate in a lustful desire for this beautiful young woman right here named Marguerite. Here we see her. Here she is leaving the church. She's a vision in white, the color of purity. Here she's holding a prayer book in her hand and a rosary. Those are signifying, her holiness. And her features are very frail. He painted her to look frail and weak, remember? But she's very delicate, and she's a picture of serenity as she gazes to her right. What she is totally unaware of are these two guys lurking in the shadows as they spy on her, and they plot to take away her virtue. As the story progresses, poor Marguerite does, in fact, succumb to temptation. Faust is able to seduce her, and she gives birth to his child. And here, the story turns very tragic indeed. Now, Marguerite can feel nothing but sorrow and shame. In a fit of panic, she decides to drown her child. And when her terrible deed is discovered, she is led to jail and condemned to die. The story ends with Marguerite sitting alone in prison, waiting for her execution. Suddenly, Faust breaks into her cell and he says that he will rescue her. At first, she rejoices, but then she sees who's coming in right behind him, Mephistopheles, and she shouts out with passion that she will give herself to God. Marguerite rejects both her lover and her sins. The angels hear her cry of passion and lead her soul to heaven. And now Faust is alone to grieve with regret for his great love. Johann Wolfgang van Goethe was considered to be one of the greatest German literary figures of the modern era. And Marguerite leaving church is only one of a series of paintings that this artist, Ary Scheffer, executed featuring characters from his story. Christine, are there any questions?
Yes, one of the viewers is confused about what happened to the baby.
The baby was drowned. And they discovered her deed and they sent her to prison.
That's a very tragic story.
A tragic story of a poor, weak, frail woman who was being put upon by this horrible man. But again, he had the devil to help him do all of these bad, horrible things.
Is that why people say the devil made me do it?
I think so, Christine. I think that's exactly why they say that. Sometimes, though, they blame the devil when it's really their own fault. Well, anything else, Christine?
Nope. Oh, wait, hold on. There's a new question. A quote from Goethe. Classicism is health. Romanticism is disease.
Ooh, very, very interesting. Well, you know, those artists, that's what they wanted to focus upon, emotion, passion. And you know what? Those people were living in troubled times, and that's what they thought about all the time. They had a series of wars, so that's what they were looking at. You know, their inner lives, their emotions. So that's what artists responded to.
Well, this story was quite a diversion from daily life, that's for sure.
Well, let's hope so. So, anything else, Christine?
No, that's it.
Okay, thanks. Now, we're going to give you back to our host, Howard. He's going to talk about a wonderful work of art and tell us a great story.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Kathleen. You guys are wonderful today. You had some good stories to tell. The final story turns out to be the first story. So let me tell you a story. Want to talk about a true and faithful wife, a true and faithful person? We're looking at her. This is a full-size marble statue of Penelope. And for those of you that are familiar with the Iliad and the Odyssey, Penelope was Odysseus's wife. And Odysseus was a great warrior. And this whole story was maybe the very first story ever in the history of stories. The Iliad tells the story of the Battle of Sparta and the Trojan Wars. And the Odyssey tells the story of Odysseus's attempt to get home. So what happens is there's going to be a war. And the war is supposed to bring back Helen, who was stolen by Paris and taken to Troy. And so the Greeks get all their generals together and they're going to go to Troy and they're going to get back Helen. And it's only going to take a few weeks. Instead, it takes 10 years. And then they win the war, the Trojan horse, long story short, they head back home. But Odysseus becomes, has a problem with one of the gods who blows him off course. And Odysseus goes through these long, troubled problems with monsters and goddesses and gods, and he has to fight off all sorts of people, and it takes him 10 years to get home, and they assume he's dead because it's been so long. And so all the suitors come and show up at Odysseus's house, and they want Penelope, who's represented here by Franklin Simmons, to declare Odysseus dead and to pick one of the suitors to marry him. And Penelope is true and faithful, and she says, nope, I'm going to wait. Finally, they convince her that he's dead. Someone must be picked as a proper suitor. So she says, all right, I'll do it. But I'm weaving, and you can see this shroud here, a burial shroud for my father-in-law. And as soon as I'm done, I'll pick a suitor. Well, what happens is during the day, she weaves the cloth for the shroud. And at night, she unweaves it. She tears it apart. And nobody can actually figure out why it's taking her so long to get it done, but that's part of the story, go along with it. Finally, and I think we have enough time to talk about this, finally, Odysseus comes back and makes it back, but he wants to make sure that Penelope was faithful to him. There's all these men not trusting their women. This is always going on. So he disguises himself, and he comes into this hall where Penelope finally says, I will pick someone. But what you have to do is you have to string this bow. This was a giant bow that was Odysseus's. And you have to shoot the arrow from this bow through the opening in the axes of 12 axes that are all lined up together. Well, nobody can even string the bow. Finally, Odysseus, who says, look, let me try it. But he's in disguise and nobody recognizes him. They all laugh because he looks like a bum. But Odysseus' son says, let him try. Well, he does. He strings a bow. He shoots the arrow straight through the opening. And he is then shown to be Odysseus. He and his son dispatch all those suitors in a most horrible way. They hack him to death. And he's reunited with Penelope. So this is a representation of a true and faithful woman, a woman who stuck by her man, a woman who had a great deal of fidelity and trust that her husband would return to her. This is an incredibly beautiful portrait. It's lent to us by the Manoogian family. The Manoogians have given it to the DIA on a long-term loan. It's in the American Gallery. When you're there, feel free to visit it. And I think that's it, except for one thing. If you've never read the Odyssey, and I've always wanted to, but thought it's impossible to access. Emily Wilson has wrote a really accessible book on the Odyssey. I highly recommend it. Christine, are there any questions?
Actually, Howard, yeah, there is one question. In that story, when Odysseus came back, wasn't it his faithful and loyal companion, his dog, who sniffed him out?
It was his dog who sniffed him out and recognized him, but it was also his old servant who was still around, that he was the only one that he trusted, and he stayed with his old servant. He revealed himself to his son, and his dog did sniff him out. Now, he's gone 20 years. This is one old blind dog, but he was able to sniff him out.
That's an awesome story. I actually have this on audio, so for people, you know, who it's a lot to read, but it's fun to listen to on audio books.
I got to tell you, Christine, Emily Wilson writes this like in contemporary English, but she still writes it in iambic verse, and she uses words that we understand, you know, commonly used words, not those old style like Shakespearean words or other kinds of words. So that was really good. We have a couple minutes left.
Hey, Howard?
Do you have anything that you'd like to add to any of this?
Howard, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Do you think that this image and the story of Penelope inspired the country tune, Stand By Your Man?
Oh, well, I don't know, Deb. That's a good question. Maybe we could email the artist that wrote that. But she stood by her man, that was for sure. It's really a great statue. So I want to thank everybody for your work today. I thank Amanda for hosting us and getting this all together on Teams. Kathleen, you did a terrific job with your work. Deb, really, really well put together things. Christine, thank you for moderating and doing the questions. All of those that are watching, thank you for being here. Next week, Ray and I, we're getting the band back together. Ray and I are going to be back together. We're going to be doing the Detroit Industry Murals. We're going to be talking about the most famous room in the world, not counting the Sistine Chapel, Diego Rivera's murals in the DIA. And we're going to be back here next Thursday at 1 o'clock. So we hope you all join us. And for the whole crew today, thank you very much and good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.